I'm always seeking video game based events less than 2 hours away from me, and it was by chance the Detroit Retro Video Game Show popped up on my radar last year. This was billed as a smaller show running for its third year, taking place in the Michigan city of Livonia in the Detroit area. I took a break from making videos at the end of 2024, so this video is obviously releasing a little late, but the Detroit Retro Video Game Show is actually held twice a year, and we're quickly approaching the next show to be held in April. However, a full event report of the Detroit Retro Video Game Show has been available on GameUbaka since the time of the show, and that link is included in the video description below if you want to see my full breakdown of the event. If you've seen my videos on the classic consoles and arcade gaming show in Cleveland, the Detroit Retro Video Game Show is a very similar event in that it is largely a swap meet style of event. However, the Detroit Retro Video Game Show did lean a little more into setting up a space to give attendees an area to also enjoy a variety of video games. The Sparks Pinball Museum had multiple pinball tables available for free play, and through a variety of other guests and featured vendors, the event also had multicade stand-ups, a dedicated NBA Showtime NFL Blitz cabinet, and a modified Super Nintendo Super System kiosk. Some consoles were also on tap, including a Vectrix, and the event featured multiple tournaments throughout the day. I arrived at the venue just after the VIP opening time, but it was well worth it to arrive at the event when I did. Traffic on the highways was light, and I made great time rolling into Livonia. After 2 hours, the benefits of the VIP pass became clear. I would largely say the extra price of the VIP pass paid dividends alone in getting a semi-decent parking space at the venue. By 11 a.m., this venue was packed, and people were parking anywhere where space existed along the block. I have a lot of video games, and what I'm actively looking for is far and few between, so I'm not really aggressive about hitting up vendors with the thought of getting to product before someone else does. But this hour of early access allowed me to comfortably go from vendor to vendor and get a feel for the venue layout. This was truly a benefit because, as I already said, this venue was packed by 11 a.m. That's certainly a plus for the event, and I'm pleased to see a positive turnout. But by that point, navigating the vendor hall was a bit difficult, and I decided to take a break and go eat lunch. Overall, there were definite highlights for the vending at the Detroit Retro Video Game Show. There was certainly a lot to see, and it sounded like the vendors had a successful show. The event runs for 7 hours, so it seems like the vendor hall had a steady stream of customers flowing through, and the vendors didn't have a period of dead time that can be seen at longer events. I was able to come away from the show with a couple of items I was actively looking for, and I even managed to pick up a few gifts as well. Here are some clips from a recent GameUbaka Retro show on Twitch that show what I purchased. I've been meaning to get to this for a while because I went to the Detroit Retro Gaming Show in November, and I still need to release a video for it. I have an entry on my website. Hey, Running Wild, what's going on? And also thanks for the opponent for joining in as well. But went to the Detroit Retro Video Game Show in November, and kind of needed to do a little bit of detail on my pickups. That way I can post a video for it. But as I said, on GameUbaka.com there is a full text-based entry that explains everything from the event, as well as there are a couple of videos on the YouTube channel for GameUbaka playing Bram Stoker's Dracula pinball table, as well as a couple of other things at the event. So without further ado, we'll just get started here talking about the couple of items I picked up at the Detroit Retro Video Gaming Show. This first one's something I'm very excited about because it was at the top of my list. This one isn't a video game, actually, it's a figure. This one was at the top of my list to find figure-wise, and it is the Toy Biz John Telbane figure from Darkstalkers. So kind of a really cool figure, decent points of articulation so you can open and close his mouth. But I like this character from Darkstalkers, and I think this figure is actually pretty cool for something video game wise that released back in the 90s. And kind of the bonus with it is when you bought this in the store, it's actually a 2-pack, and bundled in with John Telbane is BB Hood. So we got the BB Hood that's included with it. The characters didn't come with their weapons, but it does have a few of the goodies that came along with BB Hood. Her little pets, her dog there, angry wiener dog, and then there's the one that's usually pictured with her. Yep, her little dog too. Oh, we do have, she has her basket too, so. But normally BB Hood would come with at least one of her guns, and I think John Talbane came with nunchaku, but those weren't. But it's like, all I really care about is the figures, so that kind of kicks that off there. 2 figures, price of 1. This one kicks this off the list, so that was my first purchase right there, guaranteed sale, because that was a figure I was actively looking for. But at that same booth, I was not actively looking for this figure, but couldn't pass it up. We have this guy, Diablo from Primal Rage. So this one, he also gets to... oh no, this one isn't the mouth. Oh, there we go. You have to raise and lower his arm. His mouth goes to. Because I want to say this is originally for a set where there was some sort of projectile you put into his mouth, and by pushing his arm down, it shot out of his mouth, so you can see the little place there where you would put the projectile. That one wasn't on my list, but you know, we saw that one, we couldn't pass that one up. The prices were pretty good on these ones, so it's kind of like my juggernaut that I had from X-Men vs. Street Fighter, as even though it was loose, the price was too good to pass up. So that was between 2 shows. We had the X-Men vs. Street Fighter Gambit and Cammy are mint on card, because it was I purchased it from somebody who had previously worked at a KB Toys and had a bunch of gaming items from the time he worked at KB Toys. He had a bunch of crazy stuff. He had a cassette tape for the Maximum Carnage soundtrack, stuff like that, promo items you would get from KB Toys. So it was a really interesting booth. But that was at a show about 2 years ago. And then video game wise though, the big thing that I picked up is we finally got a CIB copy, WWF In Your House, for the Sega Saturn. I had this game for the PlayStation for a little while, but wanted it for the Sega Saturn. This game was only released on Saturn, PlayStation, and the DOS PC CD-ROM, excuse me. And it's not nearly as good as playing WWF WrestleMania, but it's still kind of cool. I think it has a lot of interesting wrestlers in it, and it has some really cool features since this was developed specifically for home consoles. It does have a bunch of FMV in it, and nice music on the CD quality disc, so that was one that I couldn't pass up. As well as around this time, McCaw kept talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula, so I got a nice CIB copy, Sega CD, Bram Stoker's Dracula. This one plays quite differently from the ones that were released on the NES or Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. A lot of digitized backgrounds and characters, so it plays more like a little bit more like a beat 'em up than the other style ones. But like I said, McCaw had this game on my brain, so I saw it and just decided to pick it up. That actually cost me $15 in box, correct? So the In Your House plus the Bram Stoker's Dracula, bought it from a booth. It's just a couple of guys who have a personal collection, so they don't own a store, they don't have any overhead, had very interesting stock, very reasonable prices, so had no problem shopping there. Got those couple of things. With the money I had, they had a Battle Monsters CIB for the Sega Saturn, and I kept coming back to it and thinking about it, but like I said, with the budget I had set, I couldn't work it in, so I'm kind of hoping they go back to the next Detroit Retro Video Gaming Show. That way they bring their stock again and I can check some more things out. For PlayStation though, speaking of pro wrestling, finally got, I had this for the Nintendo 64 forever, WCW Mayhem by Electronic Arts. So I talked a lot about WCW Nitro and WCW NWO Thunder for the PlayStation, and that brings there's 2 other games for the PlayStation that came after that, which would be first WCW Mayhem, which is more of a simulation based, but the one that followed this is the WCW Backstage Assault, which is not simulation based at all. It's more of a brawling game that takes place outside of the ring, which I don't think it's terrible, but it's certainly not a wrestling game. And then, of course, preceding all those games, the AKI, which was known as the Man Breeze back then, released WCW versus the World in the United States. It's based off a Japanese pro wrestling game title, but in the US, it's WCW versus the World. So, I already have 2 entries for this series on Game Ubaka, which I said is the WCW Nitro and WCW Thunder. So I might as well pick up the rest and kind of complete the whole series, as you will. I actually got a couple of loose Nintendo Wii games. The first one, my wife is very interested in the horror style of games. So for the Nintendo Wii, got a loose copy of Cursed Mountain. Don't know a lot about it, but like I said, it was cheap, loose disc, very obscure horror style game published by Deep Silver. And then on top of that, we have Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, which I played with my wife when it released. We had a lot of fun with it, so that was something that I picked up again. I think for an event of this size, the Detroit Retro Video Game Show was as feature-rich as it needed to be, especially for a 7-hour show. Instead of packing the show as full as possible and seeing what sticks, it leans on a handful of features and does them justice with the resources it has available. I did pretty much everything I wanted to do at the event within 5 to 6 hours, so I didn't stay for the entire duration, but I didn't feel overwhelmed at the show, and I didn't feel like I missed out on anything the event offered. At the end of the day, I was very satisfied with my visit to the Detroit Retro Video Game Show. Again, I'm glad I invested in the VIP pass, and the show provides a small taste of what attendees can find at large events. In a comparison, the Detroit Retro Video Game Show is a satisfying in-between of classic consoles and arcade gaming and Cleveland Gaming Classic. It offers a little more hands-on activity outside of being just a swap meet, but it also isn't an expansive event that requires multiple days to take in everything on offer. The November event had a change in venue, and the Livonia location was very convenient for me, only requiring a skip over from a couple of Michigan's main highways. So for me personally, this is a huge plus of having such an event at a reasonable distance from me. I will say the November show gave me a vibe similar to my first visit to Cleveland Gaming Classic. The attendance seemed great, and perhaps the event was outgrowing the venue. The vendor hall crowded up pretty well midday, and this spilled over into the even smaller event and arcade room. This had an effect on that room, as while there were nice items in this room, the space really limited the quantity on offer. With the large crowds at the event, it was more difficult for the limited pinball tables, arcade machines, and consoles to accommodate the attendees. At the end of the day, though, I thought the event was well organized, and I'm sure the organizers are trying their best to work with the resources they have available. This is a third-year effort for the show, and the show's website states the event was started because the organizers got tired of having to drive hours away for these types of events. I really hear you. Very coincidentally, the Detroit Retro Video Game Show website was updated just after the show for a date of April 27th, and it has been announced this show will be held in Southfield, presumably at a larger venue. At the end of the day, I feel like I got what was advertised, and a little bit more. I had a great time attending the Detroit Retro Video Game Show, and have plans to revisit. Thanks to all of the organizers and volunteers at the event, and I definitely appreciate your efforts to bring an event like this closer to home.